Awesome. Welcome, y'all. Welcome back to week 2 and part 2 of our week 1. It turned out we had more content than we could possibly get through in an hour, so we decided to add a session in. So we'll actually have 4 sessions total, and so this week will just be, I'll do a quick recap of what we covered last week. We have a couple of folks that weren't here last week, so I'll do a quick recap of that, and then we'll pick right up where we left off. And then next week we'll do cash flow projections, and we're also going to add in, so the session will be like kind of one part how to create cash flow projections for the year, and then one part if you're like, ooh, those projections aren't what I want them to be. I wish there was more cash coming into the business this year. We're going to have some time for brainstorming around like how to increase sales. And that can be whether like sales are really low, or you're like, I actually just have a little bit of extra time this summer and I'd love to kind of focus on my sales strategy. Anything in between there, we'll touch on that next week. And then the following week, the last week of May, we will dive into how to pay yourself. And so we've got a formula that'll help you figure out exactly what your salary could and should be, either on like a biweekly or monthly basis, and how to set all that up. Cool. All right. So last week, sorry, y'all, I lost my internet for a second there. Okay. Did you all just stay right here? That's amazing. Sweet. Love it. Yeah, the internet is not being ideal right now. I just jumped on a hotspot, so hopefully we'll be fine. Let me just refresh my browser because it looks like I've lost all the images in my slide deck. Alrighty, here we go. Take 2 on part 2 of week 2. Great. You may also be able to hear my chickens. They're making a ruckus outside. Okay. All right. So last week we did some introductions. I would love for you to take a second to just reintroduce yourself in the chat. It's helpful for us all to kind of get a refresher, and building community always feels nice in these types of spaces. So let us know where you're dialing in from, a little bit about your business, and why you signed up for this series. And what are you excited to learn? What are you, what are you hoping to pay attention to and grow as a byproduct of that? And then we worked on a little bit of money stories last week. So if you weren't with us, I'll post it again at the end here or while we start moving through this in the chat. We have a shared Google Drive, and we had a document in there that we were exploring some of our money stories, what we know about money, what we've learned about money, how we want to relate to money. And then we jumped into this first financial statement. So we worked on this first profit and loss sheet. And so today we'll be picking up with the balance sheet, a budget, and we'll touch a little bit on cash flow projections, which will take us into next week. And all right. Cool. I'm just going to mute y'all just because I got a little bit of feedback happening here. Awesome. Okay, cool. Welcome, Liz. Yeah, feel free to introduce yourselves there. And if you have social media handles or things like that folks would love to check out and learn more about you, feel free to throw those in there too. I'm always happy to make friends in these spaces. Yeah, or websites, either way. And so for some of you, I might be new. I'll just touch briefly. I am an anti-capitalist business coach here in Burlington. I'm also just making sure that I'm still recording. Hold on a second. Yeah, okay. Here in Burlington, and I run my own business, and then I also am the business sense manager at Opportunities Credit Union, and that's a local credit union that's here in the Burlington area and Winooski, and we specialize really in working with folks who have experienced financial hardship in some capacity, folks who have not had access to equity or wealth building tools in the past. And so this series is really designed to help folks build that financial acumen. It's obviously free. We're got a grant recently to do this work. And so really excited to just be spending more time with folks in the community and elsewhere, like outside of Vermont as well. And just, yeah, building community, building some financial acumen around these topics. And so, as I mentioned, the Business Sense program offers these workshops and one-on-one sessions to work on anything that's really like small business related. And all of our services are free. So feel free to reach out anytime if you need help or some questions. And as I mentioned at the beginning, we ended up breaking this week one into 2 sessions. And so next week we'll be working on our cash flow projections. And then the week after that, we'll work on paying ourselves. So awesome. Thank you so much for putting some of your information in there. Hey, Kara, you're in St. Louis. Yep, Seed and Spiral. I remember that one. Anna, you're here in Burlington, a family coach and energy healer. Love it. Joanne, leadership and negotiation coach for women in tech. Ooh, I like this addition we've added onto our introduction since last week. Yeah, sweet. Liz, you're in, I'm like, I don't know how to say that. Ypsilanti? Am I saying it right?
Ypsilanti.
Ypsilanti. Wow. I'm like, I don't even know how to pronounce a Y followed by a P.
A lot of people say Ypsilanti, but it's actually Ypsilanti.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks. Private practice, independent contractor, interpreting small business. I love it. Cool. Yeah. Keep introducing yourself, connect away. And so like I said, last week, we touched a little bit on money and lived experiences. I'm going to move through a couple of these slides and just, did everyone set their money date last week? I think most people said, what, Joanne? I thought you did it in the chat. I see you shaking your head there on your screen. I'm like, wait, almost everyone submitted their times that they were going to focus on money during the month.
Oh, right. Thursdays, last Thursday of the month.
Last Thursday of the month. Okay, great.
I put everything in my calendar. It falls right out of my brain, like almost the minute it comes out of my mouth.
Same. So we were talking a little bit last week about, what you pay attention to grows. And so if we want our understanding of finances in the business to grow, then we need to pay attention to them. And one of my suggestions here is to create a reoccurring money date for yourself where you're checking in once a month. It could be every other week. And just looking at your numbers, what money is coming in, what money is going out. Are we happy with that relationship each month? And this can help us it can be very helpful if this task is really anxiety provoking. I think it's it's almost like exposure therapy, right? You're like, I'm just going to keep doing it. I'm going to keep looking at the numbers until I get more comfortable at what I'm looking at. Okay, so I'm going to bring us to our profit and loss statement here. So this is our P&L sheet or income statement. Really what this is doing is summarizing money that's coming in, your costs and your expenses. And usually this is over a specific period of time. So it might be a quarter or the fiscal year. Okay. And what this should do is provide information about your company's ability to generate profit, right? And so we're looking at, do we need to increase revenue? Do we need to reduce costs? Is it both? There's a lot of other names for a P&L sheet. So if you are actually looking for a small business loan at any point in time and you go to a bank and they ask you for one of these other things, just know that what they're talking about is a P&L sheet. We talked a little bit last week about why this stuff is so confusing. And part of that is kind of gatekeeping and power holding, right? If you really don't understand your finances, you're then forced to trust someone else to interpret your finances for you, which is then therefore pulling kind of like some of your autonomy and your power outside of this relationship. So, which is why we're here, right? Is to like reclaim that power and kind of educate ourselves on what's happening. Welcome, Tierney. Thanks for introducing yourself in the chat. Okay, so who I would love to know, and like we've got a small group, which is really awesome. So feel free to unmute yourself. Feel free to talk. Who here used one of the free templates? And which one did you pick? So this was part of your homework, was to pick either Live Plan or one of the 2 free templates and to fill it out. Did anyone do that? I'm like, I'm gonna make it so I can see your faces. There we go. Yeah, did anyone fill it out? Did anyone have success with this? Did anyone have a total panic and freak out and they like burn their Google Drive down as a result of me sending this to you? Talk to me. Tell me what happened. Totally, Anna. Give me 1 second. Let me come out of here. While I find this, someone can feel free to dive in and tell us how it's going. Don't be shy. Ah, yes, Kara, not a priority, which is part of the problem. Kara, do you want to pick one now? I know. You're like,
You
"The
mean to
pressure
do
is
in
on."
front of everybody?
I'm like, what if we pick one and look at it together now? How does that sound? How does that feel?
I don't know.
You're like, that feels terrible. Why would I do that?
Yeah, I don't know.
It's okay. No pressure. I'm just thinking if it's, this time is really here for you guys. And so if it's useful to dig into something, I'm fully here to do it.
Yeah, thanks for the offer. I was too busy doing the work last week to do just facilitating a lot of workshops last week.
I
But
feel that.
which is good, because it brings in money, but
Yes. Right.
but did not spend time on the back end things last week. So if somebody else, I could do it. And also I would love if someone else did it and wants to talk about it. That would be great.
Cool. Show of hands, did anyone get the homework done? It's totally okay if you didn't. This isn't a place to like feel shame or sad or whatever. This is exactly what, is it Kara or Kara?
Kara.
Kara. What Kara is describing as like getting stuck in your business and never having time to work on your business is like one of the number one complaints I would say I probably receive from small business owners is like, I'm just so damn busy in the day to day trying to keep everything afloat that I don't have time to like do strategic planning or look at my finances or like plan, think outside of essentially just this week. And so I'm curious, is that true for other folks? Did anyone feel like the tools were hard or they got confused or lost? Essentially, I want to know, did you do it? And if you didn't do it, what got in the way?
I can really relate to what Kara said and what you just shared about like I dream and fantasize about working on and growing the business and doing some creative pieces. And then often my week just goes by in the blink of an eye because I'm so focused on like the day-to-day grind of the business and the emails and the this and that. And, some of the big picture stuff gets lost.
Yep. Totally, Liz. Would it be helpful if we spent 10 minutes putting some information in the P&L exercise? Like you don't have to share it, but like, could I give you the gift of time and give you 10 minutes to just start and we'll see what comes up? I can put some funky tunes on and we can just do a little work. Yeah. Okay. Let's do it. Let's do it.
Yeah, I would find that really helpful, Emily. And I just have a quick question.
Yeah,
so
go
we're
for it.
choosing one of the profit and loss statements at the bottom of that list that you just sent me.
Yeah.
Is there a difference between the two, just so I can pick one quickly?
Good question. Let me pull this over here. And this is a good reminder for everyone. So this is our shared folder. Just a reminder that everything's view only. So you need to make a copy in order to edit it. And we have these two profit and loss statements. So we talked a little bit, Anna, last week about depending on your type of business, some businesses are going to be way more complicated than others, especially like our product based folks, so like if you have physical products you make, like you make soap or you make earrings or whatever, you're going to have these cost of goods that we need to know. Also, if you have like a physical location or a warehouse, or if you have employees, right, all of these things start to add a little bit, like another layer of complexity. This one had a little bit more complexity baked in for you, so if that is helpful, versus this one was a little bit more simplistic. So I would say whatever one feels like it's going to be easiest for you to engage with. The other thing we talked about was a tool called Live Plan, but this is a paid product. And so you can also, did anyone like choose to create a Live Plan account? Totally okay if you didn't, just curious. So this one is essentially what it's going to do is like, it's going to prompt you step by step to put all of your information in, and it'll build these graphs for you, versus these are going to be a little bit more like rudimentary, I guess you could say. Any questions on that, Anna? Does that feel clear?
Yeah, I think I'm just gonna jump into the most simple version and see
Perfect.
what
Let's
happens.
do it. Okay, I'm going to set a timer for 10 minutes. I'll check in at 12:30 and see how we're feeling. And so your goal is to pick either this one. Oh, why does my bar keep getting in my way? Or this one. And if you want Live Plan, obviously you can do that. Cool. I will be right here. So just unmute yourself if you're getting stuck. If you have questions, if you're like, I don't know what to put here, just unmute yourself and we'll troubleshoot it. All right, I'm gonna give you 10 minutes. Get working.
Which one is the easiest?
I would say this one's probably a little simpler.
The wise
And
one. Okay. Thank you.
yeah, and you can just kind of delete lines that aren't of interest to you or value to you, or you just skip over them.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to give us some music, but feel free to just turn your volume off if you don't want it. You guys hear that okay? No?
No, but it's okay. I have a question for like where would we get depreciation, and does that stuff get auto created, or how do we do that? I'm in the Wise version, by the way.
Hold on. Your question again?
Depreciation, does that, where would we get that from?
Depreciation?
Yeah, it's under expenses. There's a line item that says depreciation. I feel like that's always like worked out by a tax person or like a CPA. I don't know what that is. I mean, I know what it is. I don't know how to develop it.
I know what it is. It's like if you would, like, I just bought a laptop and
Yeah.
my accountant person actually told me that I couldn't, or it's not that I couldn't. She recommended that I not put it on my expenses this year because of the depreciation realities related to it. And so then she was gonna do it in some other way. And actually I can't remember. I'm now being vague and unhelpful, but the like basically it doesn't really matter unless you are buying something really big.
Okay.
Yeah, it's like a big piece of equipment is usually when you're calculating.
Like, did you buy a
depreciation.
tractor
Yep.
or something?
Yep.
I bought so many tractors this year. I'm gonna because I feel like that's something also they figure out when you tell them like what your expenses are and which ones are capital expenses or like hard goods versus software. Would software go under office supplies, or where would you put like I remember on your live plan you had had the line items for like Kajabi and like the cool stuff, like where the cool stuff, the software as a service.
Yeah. If you have a lot of that, what I would suggest doing is probably just creating another line item.
Oh, okay. And calling it software. Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Like you could sub out the other expenses line for right now.
Oh yeah, I don't have rent or lease.
Yep. Or you could, there you go. You could take that part out and put software in.
Software services.
Or technical services or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally. Welcome, Maris. I'm just going to bring you up to speed. No one did their homework because no one has time to do their homework. And so we're doing the homework now. Had you completed your profit and loss statement?
No.
Yeah. We are all the same.
Great.
So we are spending about 2 more minutes working on just the profit and loss statement. So no worries. But yeah, we're just going to spend a couple more minutes working on that. And then I figured at least folks could get going on that one. And then we'll jump over and look at how that compares to the balance sheets is what we'll move into next.
Emily, I have another quick question. You said that these profit and loss statements are for a particular amount of time.
Yeah.
So, and I'm using the Wise one, I believe.
Yeah.
And so it has 2023 and then the prior year. But in the current year, obviously we are, not even quite halfway through, but almost halfway. So would you recommend, so it's like we're finding totals for these line items. So would you recommend starting with just like Q1 at this point for 2023? And should I be focusing on putting in 2022's numbers? What do you recommend?
And that's something we'll look at. Let me pull up. That's a great question.
And if this was all covered last week and I can just watch the recording, then I'm happy to do that.
You're good. We did not get very far last week at all. We had a great conversation. We just didn't get much into these things. So this is where, it depends on our profit and loss statement. Like, so what I would suggest doing is like, maybe just look at Q1 of this year. And if you wanted to look at some historical data, you could look at just Q1 of last year. And then you would be looking at a nice comparison that would actually offer you some information versus the entire year. And then as the year progresses, obviously, if you wanted to like re-update that, some of these, most of these reports are meant to be a lot of them are kind of like a snapshot in time. Some of them are more of a projection of the future of like what we want to see happen. But yeah, so I think like looking at Q1 of right now versus Q1 of last year might provide some useful information.
Thank you.
Yeah.
On that like question, I guess I would find it helpful to have a profit and loss sheet that tracks it monthly or quarterly.
Mm-hmm.
And because then I can like, or I guess I want a sheet that I can interact with, because right now I'm using an Excel sheet and that's what's tedious. Because I don't have it like programmed.
Yeah.
So is there a tool out there that I can plug in regularly or?
Yeah. And so I think
Track
this is where we're also stepping a little bit into like what might be, I think some of these tools are going to be more useful than others at certain points in time. And so based on what you're saying, it sounds like maybe working with a budget sheet might be a little bit more useful, because then you could look at these things over time. It's possible that's going to be more useful to you right this second, which is totally okay. The other thing I'll say is like, this is part of why I've found Live Plan to be so helpful, is because it's doing all of these projections for me. And so I don't have to do, like, I don't have to look at the Excel sheets and comparing them back and forth. Right. So here I can look at like net profit over the course of the year and over time, which is useful. And I can add all of those expenses in. This one is this is still looking at like annual. And so obviously it's not capturing, like for some of these, I knew the expense, and this is back to Anna, back to your question, like some of my expenses, I know what they are going to be for the whole year. Where I don't know as much is like with my revenue. So I can guess like what that would look like based on like churn rate and how often I'm going to launch. Right. So here I'm looking at how often people are leaving versus how often people are entering, and how much that fee is going to project these numbers for me over the year. And then if I have consulting work that's booked already, I can look at that profit.
Does Live Plan do the like quarterly, or do they do it only through yearly?
The profit and loss statements are annual. It looks like most of these, so like this, it sounds honestly like what would be more helpful for you is more of a budget sheet versus a profit and loss statement. Because like a profit and loss statement is just like looking at a picture of over time, like is the business profitable or not? It's not looking at like, so if we come over here, and again, this is where I think it gets a little bit confusing. But like a balance sheet, on the other hand, is showing us like how much money the company is actually worth. So now we're looking at like, if you have assets, we're going to take that into account, versus a budget is like looking at what we want to have happen over a period of time. And so it's possible that what you're really needing right now, does that sound right? Like what you're really needing right now is more of a budget so that you can see quarterly and like maybe monthly?
Well, it's also just like I wanted to have something that's easy to plug in for taxes so that I don't have to do it all at the end. Like I can plug it in as I go and like have it be in those categories already.
Let's check this out.
Are you familiar with Wave, the Wave app,
not.
or does anybody use that? Someone told me
I've
about
been
that
using it.
recently.
I did use Wave, and then I wasn't using Wave, and I don't remember why I stopped.
Okay.
Now I use QuickBooks, but the QuickBooks is for my real estate business. I don't use it for my coaching business. I might go back to Wave. I don't know.
Okay.
Let me
Does
pull
Wave
up.
do anything?
Wave's free, which is nice.
Wave starts, you can hook it up to your credit card or your bank account, whatever you spend money through, and it can start filtering your expenses for you once it learns how each thing is categorized. It has not yet learned perfectly for me, but I haven't been doing it for that long.
Okay.
I had received another budget sheet that looked useful, but now it's not working. Yeah, I think it's a really good question that like there are a lot of different tools out there. And so part of this is just figuring out what tool is going to be most useful to you. So yeah, I think that's part of it. Maybe it's worth digging in and looking at Wave a little bit. So what you're saying, what you want is to be able to see every quarter. What do you want to be able to see every quarter? Is it just, you just want to know, you want to be able to track expenses for taxes?
That's like a main priority. And also it would be great to see like quarterly, yeah, how it compares to each quarter and what I'm spending money on versus what I'm bringing in and
yeah,
and that kind of thing. Yeah.
So I think like the profit and loss statement would be useful in terms of seeing what's going out versus what's coming in. I'm wondering if something closer to QuickBooks would be useful if you really want more detailed like level, if you want a higher level of detail for what those expenses are, and you're trying to capture that data for taxes at the end of the year. It sounds like something like QuickBooks. I'm not familiar with QuickBooks. I don't have, my expenses are just very, very minimal. And so I don't have the need for a tool that big, but
yeah,
it sounds like that's probably what you're leaning towards. Remind me again what your business is.
I do consulting, like and workshops and facilitation. I guess.
What are your expenses?
My expenses are like subcontractors. I will pay subcontractors things. Like Zoom, like all the thing, like the online things like Canva. And then I have let me just pull up my thing because then I'll just know. Like I'm tracking refunds, I'm tracking like, well, right now I'm building out a website, so I'm paying people. I created a logo last year. I'm paying people to help me with the website. I'm doing professional, like I'm taking classes.
And how do you pay most of your contractors?
I do 1099s.
Okay. And like what tool do you actually like physically use? Do you like mail a check? Do you use a credit card? Do you
to send them the money? Usually it just depends on the contractor. So like I'll just know them or I'll PayPal them or something. Yeah.
Because I was thinking too, like for me, what I've found useful is like I use a business credit card to pay for everything. And so then it's like at the end of the year, I can just like export that sheet and like that's my expenses, right? Like there's not really, there are a few things that I'll like do through like, is it like build.com? I think it's called, like a few things that get paid like through, is it ACH, like through an actual like bank transfer, but almost everything I just do on a credit card. And that way it's just easier to keep track of.
Okay. Maybe that's what I need to do because right now, like part of my problem, and we don't need to spend any more time on me. I'm feeling
it's fine.
Like self-conscious about how many questions I'm asking, but like, I don't have a separate business credit card. And so that's where I'm like trying to like this is a personal expense. This is a business expense. And like, that is driving me bananas, honestly.
So that sounds miserable.
Yeah. I can say just from having, I have two businesses and for the last 6-7 years, and I have, I just went to my local credit union and they don't charge anything to set up a business account. And I have business banking accounts for each one of them with debit cards. So they're not credit because my husband's credit averse, but if you want to put money into it, you can put money from your regular personal account into it and call it like an owner contribution. An accountant can help with that, but using that debit card to pay for everything and having everything in that bank account just be related to my coaching business and everything in the other account related to my real estate business makes taxes so much easier. And it's also really nice to get a snap view to just log into the account and be like, how much money is each business doing? And it's, I would never be able to manage it otherwise. It would be too confusing.
Totally.
So I can do that. And actually I have opened for debits, but I'm actually curious about the credit card.
Yeah.
Like I have Capital One for my personal and I just use it for banking, like airline miles. And so I am wondering like, can you just go and open I've never like opened a credit card just because I've always just had Capital One forever and a day. I can't even remember how I got it.
I love it. I saw a, oh yeah, it was here. Let me put this in the chat. When I was doing research for this session, I thought, wow, that's a really big link. I saw this article on like the 7 best business cards or small business credit cards. And so this might be a good place to start and just see like, I would figure out like what kind of, obviously you don't want to be accruing interest. So make sure that you're like setting yourself up where you can actually pay this off every single month or whatever the interval is. And then I would just think about like what kind of, like, do you want to fly a lot? Do you want something with miles? Do you want something with cash back? There is a woman who does a lot of work around business credit. And so I can look her up and just hand that off to you, that introduction. And you could at least see if she has some suggestions on like, what's the best business credit card right now. Okay. I personally I've had mine for a while. I use like a Chase Explorer for miles per flight, but we don't like fly nearly as much as we used to. So
same.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just like to have it for, then it adds up over time.
But it's nice if it does something like our personal credit card is through Costco and like we get probably $1,000 cash back every year.
Mine too. Love Costco card.
I love my Costco card. So I would just think about like what kind of benefits you're looking for and maybe use this doc or this article as a starting place. Because I think that would make it a whole lot easier if just like all your expenses were housed in one place. Like it took me maybe 15 minutes to send my expenses to my accountant for taxes this year. I was like, boop, 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 and it's done.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Another quick thing on cards. My neighbor behind me, Erica, uses HSBC as her, not small business, but just as her credit card. And it's miles agnostic, but it's still for travel. So you can use it to book any hotel, any airline. And I know like I live in a small town with, terrible, like there's never deals really. So my husband's obsessed with Delta Sky Miles and I'm like, it's not always the best. So anyways, I'll leave you with that. And one more thing is that there's business credit cards, but just know that like, there's no really such thing as a small business card since they use your personal social security number. It's just another avenue to keep it clean. So
although you can actually use your EIN number.
Oh, you can?
I just learned this. So you can actually build business credit.
And so if
this is something you're interested in, the woman I was talking about that I'll send an introduction.
Yeah.
She actually does some work through CWE. So we might see if maybe she's doing a session or something, or if you can book a session with her, but she teaches a ton on like how to actually build business credit through your EIN number instead of your social security number, which is pretty cool. Cause like if you get shitty credit, nobody's going to loan to you and you're going to get shitty interest rates and all that stuff. And so like you can actually hop over and use, not that you want to like build shitty credit on your EIN number, but like if that was happening, you could kind of like have another avenue to build better credit. Yeah. These are things that are
That's
outside
great
of
to
my
know.
wheelhouse, but I'm happy to make introductions to other people that this is in their wheelhouse. Okay, so what came up in the 10 minutes that you were working on the profit and loss statement? Any questions? Anything else come up that you were like, well, I need to talk about this?
I think the thing that came up for me was that it was cool to just do the quarter and to be able to look at that, like, okay, for 2023, what was quarter one? I hadn't really done that. I'm in a like very beginning of growing my business. So it looks like quarter one, I had a loss of $135. But it's a good start. I also had to pay like annual fees for some of the software that I use and things like that in that quarter. So, and I guess just in the way that that combines with this question is I did go into my bank last week or the week before last, and I was like, what are my options? Like I'm at the point now where I'm, like I felt like I might need a credit card or a loan or, how do I'm finding that, so I officially started my business in September of last year, as in like it being my sole income. And I have racked up some credit card debt so far because I haven't been able to like meet all of my like personal, like I'm just not making enough to have the business float and my personal expenses and, the whims of teenagers and things like that I'm raising. So I'll charge it. So I've just been trying to figure out like what is the best option for me. I don't have like a brick and mortar kind of business with like actual physical things. And I'm finding that like a lot of the business loans that are out there, a lot of the like options that I'm seeing for grants and things like that are really about like, you need to buy a building or like you need to buy more product so that you can, and I'm running more of like an online
service
business, service oriented business. So I'm just feeling like if I have to keep floating the loss for, even another half a year or so, like, how do I manage that? I don't know what the best tool is. And maybe it is one of these 0 interest credit cards, but like someone else said, I also have a partner who's like, no more. Like, no, we're not. Stop. You're on a spending freeze.
You're in Vermont, right?
Yeah.
I would love to just make an introduction to some folks over at Opportunities Credit Union if you're up for it, and they can talk to you because there's like a point, and again, this is like outside of my knowledge base, but there's a point where putting money in the business is more valuable than paying down debt, and they're really, really good at helping you know when to do each of those activities, because like obviously when we don't want to hold on to that debt forever, but there's also like some of us are so debt averse that it actually is going to take us longer to build the business than it needs to, and like some debt is okay. And so that might be a really useful tool for you to just talk to someone about like, okay, if I know I need X amount of money, what's the best way to get that money while I'm working on building the business up? Yeah.
Cool.
I'll happy to. Opportunities also has some really unique funds that they can loan to folks with either no credit or bad credit. And so, which is very different than your typical bank. So their main motive is really to like just help you have a sound business versus a lot of other places have different motives when it comes to banking institutions. Okay, I'm gonna pop us back over to our spread or our I think the biggest thing I want you to walk away with from today, aside from having a little bit of time to focus on these things, is I just want you to understand the difference between these 4 documents, these 4 reports. For me, this was like the most confusing part. And if you are ever looking to take out a loan, or it's mostly if you're like looking to take out a loan, but I think it's also really useful just to be like more aware of your own finances, understanding the difference between these and if one is going to be more useful to you than the other, is my hope for you today. Okay, so we were talking about our profit and loss statements, right? And so here we're really looking at your ability to generate profit, right? Is the business profitable, or is the business in a loss, right? Profit and loss. We're looking at how much profit's coming in, how much loss is going out. We're usually looking at this at a specific period of time. Often it's over the course of a year. Sometimes it's a quarter. Sometimes it's a fiscal year. But either way, it's over a period of time. When we look at a balance sheet is really showing us how much the company is actually worth, right? And so profit and loss statement, we're thinking about money coming in, money going out. That's not taking into account necessarily things that are like a piece of equipment that you bought a year ago, or an investment you made 2 years ago, right? It's not necessarily looking at the total value of the business as a whole. So a balance sheet is reporting on assets. It's also looking at liabilities. If anyone like owns part of your company, so if you have any shareholder equity, it's looking at that. And so here we have the balance sheet reports these assets, liabilities, and shareholder equity at a specific point in time, similar to the P&L. But the P&L is really summarizing revenue, costs, and expenses. Does that make sense, the difference between the two? I had to read this like 15 times to myself to like really get that to sink into my head. Does anyone want to try and like verbalize that for us? Sometimes it's helpful to like kind of talk it through for it to stick in your brain a little bit more.
What's an example of a liability?
Oh, yeah. So let's hop over here. Good question. Sorry, my baby is not napping today. Where's our balance sheet? Here we go. I was hoping this one. Oh, here it is. Okay. So here are our liabilities. So these are things if you have accounts payable. So if we have accounts payable and accounts receivable, has anyone heard these terms before? I think we have it. Like I have them somewhere in here. Okay. So accounts payable is money that's out, and accounts receivable is money that's in, right? So accounts payable means money that you are owed. So this is like, it would be a liability because it's like money, it's money you don't technically have yet, right? So it's money, you've sent the invoice out, but the money has not come back in. We also have things like a short-term loan. Is this really small and hard to see? If you have any loans, income taxes, salaries and wages. This is kind of like a catch-all unearned revenue. If you have any long-term debt, so we'd have to ask someone the difference between like short-term and long-term debt. I'm guessing it would be like if you had like a mortgage versus maybe like for instance, has anyone been prompted by like Stripe or Square to take one of those small loans? They're offering these like $10,000 loans. But anyway, they have insanely high interest rates on them. Way higher than a bank would, but obviously if you can't get a loan from a bank, it might be something you explore. Anyway, I'm thinking that's the difference between like a short term would be like you have to pay this off this year versus like a mortgage on a like a piece of real estate, right? That would be like a long-term loan. You're paying that over like 30 years. And so yes, does that answer your question? Liabilities?
Yes.
Cool.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, so our balance sheet, we're really looking at our balance sheet, we're really looking at the assets. So like, are there any assets for the company? And for those of us that are like a service provider, you might not really have a whole lot of assets. I had to go through this process in order to apply for a grant. I had to create like a P&L sheet and a balance sheet and all this stuff. And I was like, there's barely anything on my sheets. Like there's just not a lot of line items. And that's totally normal if that is what's happening. And you're like, this isn't like a lot. I feel like a lot of these reports are really geared towards folks that do have slightly more complicated businesses or have more products. No worries, Joanne. Or you have like a lot of assets and liabilities that you have to hold into account. Okay. Any question between profit and loss and balance sheet? Does that feel clear?
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Okay. The next thing that I think can be really useful is a budget. And so this is going to help you. This is going to help us look at what our expectations are for the upcoming financial period. This is often looked at in a year format. And essentially what you're doing is summarizing your goals, where you want the business to be by that given period of time. And you're going to compare your business's budget to your actual results, right? And this is where your money date, I think, is really useful, because if we're using this, our budget one, yeah. So if we're using this budget sheet, right, and it's set out by month to month. And so right here we have your expense budget. This is projected budget expenses. And then here is our actual, right? And so what you can do is say like, you know, in January, let me find one that feels like let's come down here to operations. We're like in January, better yet, let's do advertising. You're like, I'm going to spend $400 on Facebook ads. And my goal is to like spend that over the course of like Q1 or something. And then you, at the end of Q1, you come and you're like, okay, turns out I actually spent $200 because it took me a little while to get ramped up. And then I spent $300 and then I spent $400, right? So we can start to compare what we projected might happen versus what's actually happening. And then this will show us that variance, right? So this one's kind of nice. And Kara, this might be a little bit more helpful to you because it's going to automatically perform these calculations for you. And I like this one because although we don't have any data in here right now, so you can't see it, it's going to build some cool charts for you. And you can see what you budgeted versus what you actually spent, what that variance was. And you'll get some nice charts going here. So I think this one could be useful. And I'm wondering what might be helpful for our next kind of homework assignment is to do, like, let's do Q1. Let's do the first quarter of the year. We'll do January, February, March. Put your actual expenses in here. Or you could even put, if you want to put your budgeted, you can, like, what did you think you were going to spend? And then your actual. And then what might be useful is like for Q2, start to put in your projection here and your actual. Thoughts on that for next week? How does that sound? Okay.
So
yeah, go ahead, Anna.
The budget is only expenses.
This part is only expenses. Yep. So right now we're looking at, let me come back here. And we could do, I think if we're in, because what we're going to look at after that is cash flow. And so that's more when you're like, okay, how much money is coming in right now? And we do have a cash flow projection one here. So I want to be like mindful. I don't want to like inundate you with too much homework in 1 week. And I know you guys are so tight on time. So tell me, what do you feel like would be useful? What do you want to come to next week's session with, have ready? What feels like a doable assignment? Kara's like, I don't know. She's like, whatever.
I like to talk. So
Go for it. I like to talk too.
So to do a budget, I kind of just did the Q1 actuals because that's what I put in the profit and loss statement for. So for me, that feels easy. I can just transfer those numbers over to this, and then do a projection for Q2. And then it sounds like that will support working, maybe focusing next week on this. I'm not sure that I totally understand the cash flow concept, but it seems like the budget helps inform the cash flow.
Yep, I think so too. And next week, what we'll focus on exclusively is just this cash flow projection template. So I think if we could have an idea of what our expenses are of Q1 and ideally Q2, if you want to get fancy and like project into Q3, go for it. But if we can fill out, so this tab here, this first tab, if you want to like kind of guess what you thought, just so you can like create some charts and work with it. If you end up just putting in the actuals for your projections for Q1, that's totally fine. But I would say just for the sake of the activity, maybe if you haven't looked at your expenses yet for Q1, what might be kind of cool is like, take a guess. What do you think you spent on like insurance, or if you had office supplies? Again, you can swap some of these things out if you're like, I don't have rent, for instance, but you wanted to put something else in. And you'll see there's quite a few of them. And then there's this whole additional column. So you can add your own expenses in here if there's stuff that's not captured. It might be interesting. Yeah, go ahead.
I think one of the hardest things for me is coming up with the categories, because I think that I found that was hard this last tax season, where I was like, what should I consider this expense? What's a good like kind of catch-all category? And I feel like once I have the like core categories that my business expenses fall into, it'll be a lot easier.
So maybe that's part of your homework this week is like, what are my expense categories?
And then I think that the other question that came up for me as you're saying this is for the things like I mentioned, like I'm starting to see where like as I slowly built my business over the last couple of years, it was like, oh, I got this thing and you pay for it annually. So like, oh, all of a sudden that, trying to track throughout the year, like when I need to pay these kinds of annual fees for like keeping all of the different programs that I'm using. When I'm building out this business, this budget and doing projections for each quarter, do I just put those in the quarter where the fee is going to fall, or do I average it out and like divide it by 4 and put a little bit of each of those expenses in each quarter?
What I did was, so for instance, I think here. So what I ended up doing was like just projecting, like I put them, I said like I divided it by 12 essentially, because most of my tech at this point I pay annual for, which is kind of hard in the beginning because you're like, ooh, am I going to keep doing this? Do I know if I'm going to be in business in a year? I don't want to like pay annually for something, right? At this point, I'm like pretty consistent with like what I'm going to keep using. And so I feel confident making all of these annual purchases. And so for me, I just divide it out over 12 months. But if you're like, where I think that could not be useful, and it might be more useful to put it in the months that you're going to pay, is if we want to overlap that with your cash flow projections, because let's say like you have a bunch of annual renewals that happen in June, but that's your lowest cash flow month. We would want to know that ahead of time so that we can either save some of that cash flow, and we'll talk about this more next week of like how to read that cash flow projection. But like if there are periods that are high with a lot of cash coming in, we need to know if there's a high expense coming down the road that is planned, obviously, right? So that we can allocate resources for that. So I would say like whatever, if you feel like your cash flow, if you kind of just, your gut instinct is like, my cash flow is going to be a little more volatile and like every month is not necessarily going to be the same, I would probably, I mean, we can try both too, right? Like you could create 2 spreadsheets and we could see like what feels more useful and like what gives you more peace of mind to work with. But my guess is if your cash flow is more volatile, then I would probably want to know when those annual renewals are happening. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that definitely makes a lot of sense. And you're just, I'll say this out loud for everybody. I don't know if this will feel helpful to others, but what I just realized is like none of this is set in stone. So I could just be like, I'll just try something and then I'll try something else, which I think has in the past been overwhelming for me because I felt like I have to figure out the exact thing that's going to work before I do it. Like I was having with maybe the cart before the horse or something.
Yep.
Like reminding myself that I can just like delete files if they're not helpful.
Well, like, and like these files are for you, right? Like these are for you to read. So if you're not getting what you need out of them, then yeah, like let's change them, right? Like let's try something different. Let's pull a different tool. My hope was in creating the shared drive was like to just give you a starting place with a couple of these reports. Because honestly, like you can either A, build your own, B, you can Google search like for balance sheets and you will get thousands of them. So like, let's, put a couple numbers in, let's play with it. If it's working, if this is useful, if it's giving you the information you need, great. If it's not, then like, let's try again. Any other questions right now? I know we've gone a little over time. I want to be mindful of y'all.
I have 2 super tiny questions.
Yeah, go for it.
The first is, do you categorize your mortgage or rent where you live as an expense if you work from home?
And what you can do is your accountant can tell you what the equation is for that.
I knew for taxes, but I wasn't sure if like as we're calculating our profit loss or budget, if that's true as well.
It's a good question.
Do you put that in your profit?
I haven't, but I like the idea of putting it in because it's like, it is an expense and we work out of the home and
like the biggest expense in my life.
It is a very big expense. And I think that's also like, there was a really great, on NerdWallet has a lot of really cool stuff if you guys are like looking for things. But they
have an article for everything.
What?
They have an article for everything I've ever Googled.
They have a lot of really interesting things. They had this budget. It was either the calculator or the worksheet. I think this, no, it wasn't that one. I thought this was really neat. So this was a pretty cool budget. This was more for a personal budget, but it would be interesting to see, like if you did a personal budget, how much money do you actually have to be making? And I think that could influence the business budget in figuring out like, what are the actual expenses? And like, cause like what you're paying yourself through the business is contributing to that mortgage. And so obviously you wouldn't want to be like double counting the mortgage in 2 places. But I think if you were counting like, 15% of the mortgage is like a business expense versus 85% of the mortgage is a personal expense, you could kind of like separate them out if that felt useful. Again, back to like what Anna said, like whatever's going to be useful to you. If it's just further complicating and like making a mess of something, then I wouldn't worry.
Yeah.
But if it's useful to you to know, you know, if
Yeah,
you're
and I
like,
guess,
yeah, go
yeah, I
ahead.
guess it's like for what purpose? Because
Yeah,
like if it's
what's
for taxes, I want a greater percentage of it to be
sure,
for
sure,
my
sure.
but if I'm trying to get a loan, maybe like not wanting it
Mhm.
there, for
Mhm.
example.
Well,
Yeah.
if you're getting a loan, I would actually think it would still be greater. You'd want to say like my mortgage is a lot and like so therefore I
Mm,
need more help.
mm,
Like I
yeah.
do have these expenses, so I need this money. Okay.
And then the second question is, do you personally buy liability insurance as a coach?
Um, I'm such a bad model in this. Maris. I have not bought personal liability insurance.
Somebody can
But
sue you.
I am an LLC, and so are you an
Yeah.
LLC?
One of my businesses, yeah.
Yeah. So I think I haven't, and again, this is not like good practice necessarily. I haven't run into it as an issue yet, and so therefore I have not addressed it as an issue. I do know some folks that do though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've gotten both pieces of advice. Both.
Yeah.
One of them was very passionate.
About getting it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's
And what about the person that wasn't?
the person that wasn't said you can get it at the last minute. Like if you feel like somebody's shady, you don't, it's
Yeah.
not like health insurance with
Yeah,
Yeah.
like pre-existing conditions
Yeah.
and things.
Yeah.
And you get it just exclusive, like just in. I guess I'm like, what is it in it to prevent someone from in case someone sues you, correct? Yeah.
Yeah, because even if you're totally like, even if it's a like fraudulent case, you still have to pay for lawyers to.
And so
meet.
it would cover.
It would cover
those
the
fees.
lawyers.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I guess you just have to balance. Like to me, that's like it reminds me a little bit of like travelers insurance, right? Like you're like the likelihood that I'm going to need this travelers insurance is very low. So do I want to risk it or do I not? So I think that also speaks more to just like your risk aversion and risk tolerance.
Yeah. Yeah, totally.
And how much business you're doing and like
And how big the clients are.
how big the contracts are and like, yeah.
Yeah.
I would say if you were doing like big corporate or government contracts where there's a lot of money at play, like, yeah, I might want some coverage.
Yeah, it's interesting because we're going to be working with a school soon, and people sue schools up the wazoo. People love suing schools. And so I don't know, like, are we now in that like rat race of
Do you know
litigation?
someone else you could ask? Like, do you know other folks that like other contractors that work with the school? You could ask if they have it and like, have they ever used it? And have you talked to an attorney about it?
No,
No.
just people who have been in law school.
What you could do, this is fun fact for Vermont folks. Vermont Law School will, and I can introduce you to Nicole, who is the contact over there. They offer like up to 10 hours of pro bono legal help.
Wow.
And so that could be an option.
Yeah, this would be like 10 minutes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Vermont School.
Yeah. I'll send it introduction.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. All right, my friends, I'm going to wrap us up. I know we've gone over a little bit here. I'd love to just hear either in the chat or if you want to unmute yourself. Sorry, I didn't, for some reason, my chat hadn't come up. I didn't see you wrote those in, Maris. Thanks for unmuting yourself. What are you going to bring next week? What feels like a good next step?
I can start.
Go for it.
I've been using Wave and I've been like categorizing things because I want it to be as automated as possible.
Right.
So I want to play with what kind of charts it can deliver me and see if it can do any of these things for me without me having to do it.
Awesome. I love it. Cool. Tierney, Ashley, or Anna?
Sorry, I was reading the chat and didn't actually hear your question or your prompt.
You're like, what do you want from me? What are you going to bring to next week's session?
Oh, I'm definitely going to do the budget
Cool.
Q1 actuals and then see if I can try to project as far into this year's future as possible. Definitely
I love
Q2, maybe all 4 quarters.
I love it. I love that. Tierney or Ashley, are you in a place where you want to share?
You're eating lunch.
Yeah.
Baby.
I'm like, I'm hungry.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, no, it's okay, Tierney. I know Tierney has twins that are tiny like mine. Are yours also not napping? Because mine's not napping. Okay, cool. Looking deeper at the tools you already have, mostly QuickBooks. Okay, I love that. Just fell asleep. Hallelujah. Nobody talked to Tierney right now. Awesome. Ashley, feel free to unmute yourself or type in if it's helpful. But excited to see you guys next week. We'll go over cash flow projections, and then we'll also talk a little bit, if anyone wants space to talk about how to increase cash flow moving forward, we can talk about that too. Cool. All right. Thank you all so much for your time.
Thank you so much.
Yes, I'll see you next week. Okay. Bye.
Bye. Have a good afternoon.